everyone, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Generation Z's declining mental health. Statistics have shown that this generation is the most depressed and anxious of any other generation. Part of this, of course, has to do with more people feeling comfortable talking about mental health and getting help for it, but a lot of it, you can't ignore. It's very statistically significant that mental health is actually deteriorating as the generations go on. And this video kind of bounces off of my extended adolescence video. In that video, I literally go from birth to death, from helicopter parenting and history to university culture, talking about how these social structures are making us more anxious and less autonomous than ever before, why this generation is taking longer to grow up, and so on. But in this video, I'm going to be looking very specifically at mental health in and of itself, rather than all the broad topics that I cover in that video. And so when it comes to the topics that I'm going to talk about in this video, which by the way, I always leave timestamps down below, I'm going to talk about the statistics of declining health. I'm going to talk about the different landscape around schools and universities and the way that we're all seeing this decline in mental health. I'm going to, of course, talk about social media and isolation and body image issues among young people and among everyone really who's online. I'm going to talk about instant gratification on the internet and the idea that we should always feel good. I'm going to talk a little bit about overdiagnosis, and I'm just going to talk about a lot more, including, the specific point in history and how I feel like this point in time in history is like leading to a lot of existential angst and questions and stuff like that in a way that's more extreme than it has in the past. So if any of that is interesting to you, just keep watching. So some general changes and what we all kind of see before I jump right into the statistics. Mental health has been on the decline for a while, but it's really rapidly been declining since around 2013. And this is really significant because this is around the time people really started getting ingrained in social media. Most everyone had an iPhone by that point. In 2012, 1/2 of Americans had smartphones, but by 2015, this number grew to 92%. And for me personally, I went to high school between 2012 and 2016, and I noticed the most drastic changes in the world around me about halfway through that experience. Naturally, people had a lot of mental health issues and anxiety going into high school. I was one of those people, but especially halfway through high school when everyone had Instagram and social media and was on Tumblr, things kind of started getting noticeably worse. I mean, there was one point in my high school life where in 1 week, 3 of my close friends were being hospitalized at the same time for suicide attempts. It was really difficult to deal with. And of course, me and some close girlfriends of mine, we all had eating disorders. It was like normal. Self-harm was very normal. A lot of people engaged in it. I mean, like how it is now. And of course, these aren't new issues. These have been happening for a long time, and especially things like self-harm and eating disorders oftentimes happens in social groups among girls. It's like a notable thing. But with social media and the pervasive body image issues that comes with that, it's actually exponentially gotten worse, which I'm going to get to in the next section. But basically, halfway through my high school experience, people seem to be getting more and more depressed. Someone committed suicide. A few years after graduating, 3 other people had committed suicide, and my school only had 650 people, so it's a small sample. And there may have been others as well. Those are the ones that I heard about because those are people who I knew. And of course, a lot of people in middle school and high school started going on psychiatric meds. I'm going to talk a little bit about my feelings on this later on. And basically, the kids just aren't all right, okay? They ain't all right. And it hasn't always been like this. Of course, mental health has always been an issue. Suicide has always been an issue, but it has gotten worse. And I have a couple of friends who teach high school, and they've both told me how much it's gotten worse over the span of their careers. The first one has been teaching for several decades, and he first noticed around 2013 the shift where so many students were being hospitalized and so many students were taking long extended time off due to mental health issues. He says that before this social media era, it was very rare for someone to not show up to school or to be hospitalized for a suicide attempt. But since then, it seems like almost 20% of students have either taken time off due to mental health or have been hospitalized or have asked for accommodations. And the other teacher who I talked to has been teaching for 6 or 7 years, and he's also noticed a lot more students asking for accommodations due to mental health on homework assignments and due dates and all of that, especially during the pandemic. And so basically, I think everyone, especially if you're in school or if you have a child who's in school and is school age, or if you're a teacher and so on, it's very clear that Generation Z is struggling. There's some shit happening. And when it comes to how the pandemic has affected all of this, I feel like it's going to show really long-term effects, like this lockdown stuff and people not being able to see their friends and spending so much time online and on their screens. I feel like we haven't even seen the worst of it. I feel like the effects are going to be really long-term. There's really no way to predict it, and that's really unfortunate. And I mean, only time will tell. I mean, things were already bad before the pandemic, so I don't even know how it's going to be now. And so when it comes to going into actual statistics, I'm going to read some off for you. Eating disorders increased from 0.18% of the population to 0.21% from 1990 to 2017. And I personally would estimate that it's actually a lot larger than this, at least maybe not eating disorders proper, but disordered eating, which most people don't get help for. I think that's going on a lot nowadays. Suicide for people ages 10 to 24 increased by 56% between 2007 and 2017, and 56% in a 10-year window, coincidentally right when the fucking iPhone came out. Like, yikes. And most of those increases were among women. As we all know, men are more likely to commit suicide than women, but the most drastic change in suicide statistics have been from women, and the most drastic changes when it comes to mental health have been in women, though it has been on the rise for both men and women, which I'm going to touch on later. From 2010 to 2016, teens between 12 and 17 experienced an increase in major depressive episodes from 8% to 12.8%. And the most notable aspect of this, like I said already 100 times in this video, is the advent of the smartphone and social media. It's basically the defining aspect of Gen Z. We're the first generation to grow up completely online. And then when it comes to lifestyle changes in this period and screen time use, I'm going to read a quote from Coddling of the American Mind talking about the psychologist Jean Twenge and her research on this generation's mental health problems. It states, Twenge explains causal variables by examining all the daily activities reported by individual students in 2 datasets. Twenge finds that there are just 2 activities that are significantly correlated with depression and other suicide-related outcomes, such as considering suicide, making a plan, or making an actual attempt. Electronic device use, such as smartphone, tablet, or computer, and watching TV. On the other hand, there are 5 activities that have inverse relationships with depression, meaning that kids who spend more hours per week on these activities show lower rates of depression. Sports and other forms of exercise, attending religious services, reading books and other print media, in-person social interactions, and doing homework. And it's also been shown that when it comes to screen time, social media and TV are the ones that most affect people. When it comes to video games and other screen times, it doesn't have much of an adverse effect. And this is due to social comparison and body image issues. And this is also why the mental health crisis disproportionately is affecting women, is because women are more likely to compare themselves online to other women and their friends and peer groups, more likely to compare themselves to the models and actresses they see on TV. When it comes to advertisements, we all know they just create insecurities sometimes, don't even exploit current ones, but create insecurities, exploit them, and sell you a product. And the more time that you spend online and on screens, the more you're exposed to this kind of content. And I think something that's important to note too is the difference between female and male aggression, because female aggression generally takes the form of social bullying. A lot of it is pointing out how somebody looks, a lot of it is excluding you from events and telling you about it, making up lies about you. I mean, Mean Girls is legit, you guys. Like, that movie is legit. And it would be so much worse now if it was created with social media. But when it comes to being a woman and growing up and needing social acceptance and needing a friend group and needing validation and literally going on your iPhone and seeing with the actual numbers how much popular everyone else is compared to you, where everyone else is going, how excluded you are from everything else, like, that's horrible. Especially the validation thing, because yeah, literally your self-worth can be defined by how many likes you get on a post. I mean, you could literally see mathematically which classmates are more popular than the others, and I imagine that this can have a really negative effect on people. Like I stated in my extended adolescence video, people started using Instagram around my freshman or sophomore year, but I mean, it didn't really take off as much as it does now, so it never really affected me in that way. I had one later on in high school and then I deleted it. I was just not into it. But I do remember on Snapchat sometimes I would see people's stories and where they are and be like, oh, I wish I was there. I feel like such a loser for not being there, and with being with these people. And when people are spending so much time on their screens, it's said that half of Gen Z are spending 10 hours or more online. This has a huge effect on you. And what's also notable about that study, and I think is really important to emphasize, is that after 2 hours of screen time use is when the negative effects start, but before that 2-hour mark, people are mostly unaffected. So it's not like you have to get rid of screens altogether or social media altogether. It's really about limiting use and being conscious about what you're consuming and how you feel about it. But when it comes to Gen Z, they're the loneliest and most isolated generation. The millennials follow closely behind, which is the other mostly online group. They saw the advent of all this stuff. I mean, I saw it too as an elder Gen Z, but I did grow up with the internet. I did have a computer in my house. You know, we had dial-up and everything, but like, I remember the internet. And I don't remember a time before the internet. But But millennials are also a lot online, and they're also very isolated and lonely. And this is because so much social interaction today takes place online instead of person to person. There's no human to human contact, which is the most important socialization that you can have. And then something else I think is important to mention, the more time you spend online, the less time you're spending exercising physically, and we all know that physical exercise is literally one of the best ways to boost your mental well-being. So I thought that that was worth a mention. But moving on from these specific statistics, I'm going to go into social media and instant gratification. So these are topics that go hand in hand, social media and instant gratification, because, getting a like on your post, that's instant gratification. Scrolling and seeing a meme that makes you laugh, that's instant gratification. People are very hooked on the dopamine hits they get from the internet. If you think about the layout of TikTok, it's literally just video after video, like one after another, just all this information and all these visuals and all this fast-paced stuff like just thrown at your face. And it's like you don't even have time to think. You're just scrolling through and scrolling through. And because this kind of media is so addictive and because we get so hooked on these instant dopamine hits, it's really hard to have long-term joy and fulfillment, and it's really easy to become depressed and anxious and isolated. Real-life satisfaction, as we all know, but is really hard to implement, comes from long-term fulfilling work. It comes from working on things over time, projects. It comes from having long-lasting, supportive, and challenging relationships with people one-on-one. It's something that has to be actively worked for and built up over time. You have to take time out of your day to reflect, to become self-aware, to fix the things where you went wrong, fix relationship errors that you made so that you could still keep the person in your life, learn from your mistakes, grow. There's just so much to life, but when people are so online and so addicted to media and on their screens for 10 hours a day, like so much of this gets lost. And I know social media isn't the cause of all these mental health issues. It's not the cause of everything. It's not the devil, but I'm going to get more into that towards the end of the video. The other thing about our generation is I feel like there's an expectation to feel good all the time, and that goes hand in hand with instant gratification. And when the expectation is to feel good all the time, which is literally impossible, it makes the times where you feel depressed or sad seem so much worse than they really are. It makes you feel like a failure. It makes you go in this whole tailspin of, why aren't I feeling good? Why am I feeling like this? I don't understand. And instead of just accepting that that's a normal aspect of human life, that you ebb and flow, that you're happy sometimes, you're sad sometimes, you're anxious sometimes, you're scared, like instead of experiencing that organically and not tying too much importance to those fluctuations, people tie a lot of importance to it because the expectation, because we spend so much time online, that's literally advertising to us that we should feel good all the time, and seeing people on our screens who are having the best time ever on their Instagram posts, and TikTokers who are literally gorgeous and you'll never be that pretty. It's normal to think that you should be happier and that you should be having more fun, and that whenever you feel bad, that's like a failure, like that's something that you did wrong on your part, when that's not true at all. Obviously, it's possible to perpetuate your own suffering. I talk about that constantly on my channel, and there is some degree of autonomy that comes with your feelings of suffering, but you can't eliminate suffering altogether, and you can't eliminate feeling depressed altogether. And blaming yourself and thinking too hard about these issues when you know that, from your experience as a person, emotions come and go, I feel like that could cause a lot of harm. But for some reason, there's this idea going around that you should just always feel good. And then some other aspects of social media, I talk about it in every video, so I'm really going to refrain myself here, but there's the whole cancel culture, online shaming, PC culture, everything's an aggression, everything is offensive, just an entire culture online of anxiety and shame and aggression and volatility, and it really, really brings you down. But I talk about that in all my videos, and I think in my next video I'm really going to dive deep into the online shaming culture and the outrage culture and the attention economy and so on. I know I always talk about it, but I'll go more in detail in the next video. But the other last thing I wanted to mention about social media and Gen Z as well is Gen Z's sense of humor. I think one of the most marked features of Gen Z humor is how much self-deprecation there is, and I think this really reflects the anxiety and self-consciousness of this generation. Everyone is always making self-deprecating jokes, they're always putting themselves down, they're always criticizing themselves before anyone else can. They're always like being super self-conscious. Like, I can't really mimic the humor. I'm a very unfunny person, but I have just noticed a lot through memes and jokes and whatnot that people seem to be very self-deprecating to an extent that I haven't really seen previously in my life. And I think a lot of this has to do, again, with online shaming, online bullying, the fact that everyone is so harsh and critical online that literally just existing, it's easier to put yourself down before anyone else can first. And it's almost become just a defining feature of this generation and the way that they interact with each other. Also, can I just point out, it's always the most insecure people who are the most mean on the internet. So if you're making self-deprecating jokes and feeling bad about yourself because you think an internet troll is gonna do it first, like I know just saying get over it and be confident is like not gonna help because it's so hard to become confident, but you should really think about the types of people who are gonna put you down on the internet through a keyboard, and just think about how much value you should be putting on their opinion. Just as like a little bit of advice. That's something that I need to take for myself too. Not to say that some criticism isn't valid, not trying to dodge that, okay? See, even I'm all self-conscious now. But now I want to talk about social media, specifically how it relates to body image and body image issues. This is one of the ways where I feel like social media disproportionately affects women because they're more focused on their looks and their appearance, and more of their self-worth is tied into their appearance, and most of their value to society is based on what they look like. And especially when you're in high school and like figuring things out, or middle school, like being physically attractive and fitting in, especially after going through puberty when your body is like going haywire and like you don't know what the hell's going on, is something that's very important to pretty much everyone. And so when it comes to social media and you're scrolling through and like there's just so many beautiful women one after another, like how can you not feel horrible about yourself after that? I'll show you, I have like a private Instagram that literally 0 people follow. I will not let a single person in my life follow it. I just use it as a diary, a visual diary, and it's like on private. But I'll show you what my feed looks like if I just like a couple pictures of pretty girls. All of a sudden everything is pretty girls, pretty girls. Somehow they all look exactly the same. Like there's literally no diversity. It's all like the exact same generic girl in different forms. No offense if you're one of those girls. And it's like even for me, I'm like, Jesus Christ, man, like this makes me feel horrible. I can't even imagine being like 13, 14 and this is what I'm seeing all day. I would just like, Jesus Christ, I'd feel so horrible. And this is something that people talk about a lot on YouTube, so I won't spend too much time there, but this is a huge issue. I think it obviously has a huge impact on the rise of eating disorders. It has a huge impact on anxiety and depression and feelings of low self-worth and insecurity. And then like I said earlier, comparison traps. It's really easy to compare yourself to others, whether it's just looks or that other people are doing more fun things than you. It can really lead you down a toxic cycle, and that's really unfortunate. It's like how people have always been complaining about Photoshop when it comes to like magazine covers. Like throughout the generations, they're always complaining like, these are airbrush or this is Photoshop. But now it's like people it's people you go to school with who are like face tuning their photos, changing the lighting, making everything look as good as possible, getting, plastic surgery the day they turn 18, like it's a whole mess. And so then a short section on men's mental health, because obviously I've been primarily talking about women here. I think it's important to keep in mind, as I said earlier, that men are more likely than women to commit suicide. They generally report higher feelings of isolation and loneliness than women. They're more likely to have addiction. And when it comes to the suicide rate amongst teenagers specifically, it peaked in 1991 among adolescent boys, but slowly it's been climbing back up there, especially since the past decade. And when it comes to addiction, I think something that we really need to keep in mind is that even though Generation Z is engaging in less sex than any other generation, they're engaging in less drugs and alcohol than any other generation, partly due to them being so isolated. I think when it comes to men, something that you have to watch out for if you care about, the young men in your life is that even though people are consuming less drug and alcohol, and so maybe they're not as addicted to those things, when it comes to pornography and video game addiction, those are on the rise, especially when it comes to isolation, because those are generally behaviors that people go to when they feel lonely. So I feel like the addiction is maybe being substituted for other things, but we are still seeing men have more addiction issues than women. And then also, of course, as we all know, unfortunately, men are much less likely to seek help for mental illness and issues that they're facing, which also leads to inconsistent reporting when it comes to men's mental health. But I just wanted to mention that since my last section on body image mainly pertained to women, although men also have reported lower body, image and self-esteem, because there are obviously male beauty standards, there are like idolized men in media, and they are affected somewhat. But in general, most of the increases that we've seen lately affect women disproportionately. And so the next little section I want to talk about is overdiagnosis and overprescription, because like I said at the beginning, a lot of these mental health statistics are, I'm sure, 100% based on the society around us and based on what we've all seen with our own eyes, legitimate. Like, mental health really has been going down in recent generations. But like I said at the beginning, there's also the fact that people are more open about talking about mental illness and mental health and are more likely to get a prescription, get a diagnosis, go to a therapist. And that, of course, skews the numbers somewhat as well. But when it comes to overmedicalization and overdiagnosis, That's one of the drawbacks when it comes to things being normalized, like mental illness being normalized or whatever, is that people start overdiagnosing. And I'm not saying this happens all the time, but it definitely happens sometimes. I've talked in a previous video about how a psychiatrist diagnosed me with bipolar disorder when I literally don't have bipolar disorder. Even my therapist was like, you literally don't. And then she was going to prescribe me medication for it. And then she literally said to my face, she's like, I'm not going to prescribe this to you because I don't trust you enough to not kill yourself with the pills. But again, I talk about that in another video, and I don't really want to talk about my own mental health in this video because it's not about me. But the thing is, a lot of people go in with certain issues, like maybe they're grieving a loss of a loved one, or they're just feeling low, or they're having testing anxiety or some kind of thing like that, and immediately doctors are prescribing medication. They're immediately diagnosing the person with a label like, oh, you have depression, oh, you have anxiety, when sometimes the person's just going through a depression. They don't have clinical depression. And some of the issues with this, which I kind of talked about in my last video about, everything being seen as trauma nowadays, and trauma turning from an objective to a subjective standard to where it encompasses everything. A lot of this kind of labeling and diagnosis and identification, when it's a misdiagnosis, can lead people down a bad route. They can overly identify with their disorder. It can be harder to overcome whatever they're struggling with because they feel like it's attached to their identity. Like, oh, I'll never be happy because I have depression. I'll never be calm because I have anxiety. Especially when it comes to doctors and psychiatrists who treat these as things that can't be improved upon, that you can only take medication for to fix. I think that's totally bonkers. And something else I want to talk about, which I know everyone, talks about, is the diagnosis of ADHD in children and giving children Ritalin. I don't doubt that, sure, maybe there are some kids who genuinely have ADHD, but can we also recognize that it is totally unnatural to force a child to sit for 8 hours a day in school and expect them to just be calm and sit there and just let the teacher throw whatever it is at their face and not react? Kids have so much energy. They're these little tiny little people with so much energy they can't take it. That's why they're always screaming for no reason. They're just screaming all the time and running around and hitting things and throwing things around. That's just what kids do. But now it's so many children get diagnosed with ADHD and get put on drugs from such a young age. And I know a lot of people have issues with this, and I know a lot of people think this is a old person thing to worry about, but I'm worried about it. I don't think that's natural, and I don't think that's healthy, and I don't think that's good. I'm not against prescription medicine as a whole, especially when you have more severe illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar 1 disorder. Sometimes psychiatric meds are really necessary. Sometimes they're helpful in the short term for, dealing with depression and anxiety. But there's also the addictiveness factor, particularly among with Xanax. And there's also the fact that when it comes to antidepressants, long-term use, you can become tolerant to it, or it could start having adverse effects or just not working for you anymore. And I think there are just other solutions that are more worth looking in towards. But yeah, I'm not fully against psychiatric medication, but I think especially when it comes to children, we should be really careful about who is prescribed certain things or not. I mean, it's literally it's a joke, but also people actually do it, where it's so easy to get a prescription for Adderall or Xanax or Klonopin. It's so easy. You literally just show up to the doctor, rattle off a couple of symptoms off WebMD, and next thing you know, you're at CVS pharmacy picking up your Adderall prescription so that way you can pull some all-nighters. Doctors are so just willy-nilly about giving out drugs and giving out diagnoses, and it's just, I don't know, there's a lot of issues that come with that. Sometimes it can be beneficial, but can easily be abused. And also, let's just face it, when it comes to psychology and psychiatry, it's literally just the human history of human experimentation. It's just experimenting on people throughout history, like electric shock therapy, the repressed memory stuff I talked about in my last video. It's all just different practices and different medicines being tried out, debunked. It's just an ongoing process. I'm not against psychology. It's my favorite subject. I'm not against psychiatry as a whole, but it is just something to be aware of. So then when it comes to environmental stressors, this is really important to talk about. I talk about this a lot in the economic section of my extended adolescence video, so a little bit of this is going to be repetitive, but I'll make it brief. The first thing I want to note is the most common stressors for Gen Z, because most Gen Z are stressed and experience physical symptoms from stress. And what they're most stressed about are money, debt, housing, hunger, and mass shootings, with the main ones being money, debt, and housing. And like I say in my extended adolescence video, this is not shocking at all. Number one, these are the three things I'm always most stressed about. But when it comes to money, obviously part of this is that Generation Z are people under the age of 25, so it's harder to find a full-time career and long-term work at that age. That's natural. But when it comes to debt, as I've stated before, college tuition costs are absolutely insane. When you're 18 and you go to college, if that's what you decide to do, and you're stacking away all of this debt that's going to take you 30 years to pay off based on some decision you made when you were a little teenager, yikes. It makes total sense that that's stressful. And when it comes to housing, I mean, it's really hard. as Gen Z to be able to afford a house, put down money on a house, a down payment, including millennials as well. It used to be much easier back in the day, but it's really hard nowadays to even make a living wage. If you're making minimum wage, you're not making a living wage, and it's really difficult, honestly, in this economic environment to be able to like buy a house, have security, have a career that isn't gonna, get rid of you after 6 months. I mean, the whole gig economy thing is real. Like, Gen Z lives in a gig economy. People don't stay at their jobs for very long. There's a huge emphasis on being independent, having your own business, and being an Uber driver and an independent contractor and all of that, which is very precarious labor. When it comes to the pandemic, like I said, we've never seen so much employment, as if the Great Depression didn't happen. But there's been so much unemployment lately, and unemployment is correlated with increased rates of depression, especially long-term unemployment. And as for the Great Depression, as for throughout time, the most unemployed group of people are typically 18 to 24-year-olds. And then, like I said about the pandemic, I mean, we're gonna see some really long-term effects from this. The pandemic really screwed over a lot of people, I mean, pretty much everyone, but especially if you already had mental health problems. And I think everyone can admit, I don't know anyone, unless you like made a lot of money off of this pandemic, I think most everyone's mental health has declined at least somewhat over the course of the last year and a half. But I also think it's absolutely worse for kids who are in high school. Like, I can't even imagine 2 years of my high school just not existing, like just being on Zoom, being stuck at my parents' house under the authority of your parents, having no independence, not being able to see your friends at the time in your life where it's most important, being on Zoom for 8 hours a day, then spending the rest of that time scrolling through TikTok and Instagram, and then just like watching the news and waiting for everything to be over. Like, Jesus Christ. And obviously, this isn't the first time in the world that all these historical events have been going on all at once. But with the pandemic specifically and with lockdown specifically, I mean, the effects on mental health, it's just bad. And then to zoom out a little bit more on this last section, I want to talk about this moment in history in terms of just humankind as a whole and human history. Because I think there is something to be said about the decline in mental health and meaning and personal fulfillment and increased rates of depression and so on, with the fact that we're living here in the first world, at least, in the most privileged time in human history. There's less child labor than there ever was. If you're in the first world, there's practically no child labor. The workday has been shortened to 8 hours. More jobs are corporate and office jobs rather than dangerous physical labor jobs. We've had insane development when it comes to medical stuff, including medicines and hospitalizations and vaccines and so on. People are living longer. We have a lot easier access to food and even a surplus of food if you live in the United States. There are obviously people who are starving and hungry, but we also literally have an obesity epidemic. And yeah, I'll say it, we also have the internet, which is an insane luxury and privilege, even though we're seeing so many negative effects alongside that privilege. But the thing about all of this privilege and all of this extra leisure time and not having to worry so much about where your next meal is going to come from comes with more questions around existence. Because when you're slaving away, laboring all day, you don't really have time to think about what is the meaning of life. You're just busy living life and doing life. But when you have time to sit back and reflect, a lot of those questions come. And I think on a mass scale, we're kind of going through a sort of existential turning point. And obviously, the question of the meaning of life and what is existence for has literally been around since humans developed the ability to think. But I do think there have been a lot of rapid changes. And I think it's even possible to argue that this existential threat is more difficult to deal with than physical threat, because physical threat exists in the real world. You can make practical solutions and tools for it. But when it comes to existential threat, it's all cerebral. It's like really easy to get wrapped up in your own head, to get super anxious, to like not know what the hell is going on, to be super concerned with things that aren't concrete, which are just harder to deal with in general. And in addition to this, set meaning has been dissolving over time. Gen Z are the least religious people, and millennials fall shortly behind. And I'm agnostic personally, so I'm not super invested either way, but religion gives you purpose in life. It does. And going to church and stuff and being around people, singing together, sharing things, it binds people together. It creates communities. You have a shared purpose and fulfillment. You have something outside of yourself to strive for and to like give you comfort and meaning. But the more that people drift away from that, like, it's pretty obvious that some mental chaos is going to ensue, and existential questions and anxiety and depression and fits of like not knowing what the hell's going on. And then same when it comes to shifting gender roles. Obviously I'm glad that the feminist movement existed, this first and second wave at least, and that I'm able to have political equality to men, that I'm able to make my own money, that I don't have to worry about being married to someone who's a domestic abuser and not being able to divorce them because I literally can't make money on my own, or I don't even have a say on if I get divorced or not. I'm obviously grateful for all of that, but these shifting gender roles are unseen before. Like, this has not been seen before. And the reason why I think it's having an effect on our existentialism and like our feelings of what is existence for is because, like with religion, it's taking away traditional structures. When you're born, before this whole feminism stuff, like you have one purpose in life or a couple purposes in life. You have role models that you look towards and they tell you what to do, and you become a mother, you get married, you're a domestic, you do whatever you do. And if you're a man, you have a very strict role as well. You work the job, you go out into war, you bring home the money, you take care of your wife and your child. And like, there's something to be said about the simplicity of that. Obviously, it comes with its issues, okay? Like, don't get me wrong. But in these cultures and these societies and how it was in previous history, you're born with a particular role. You're born knowing that you're contributing to a society, to a community. You have specific things that are expected of you, and if you achieve those things, which most people can, then you don't have as much reason to be fretting over, being self-conscious and comparing yourself to others and like what's going on. Like, some aspect of it seems simpler. Maybe I'm just nostalgic, but... And then I think also this shifting gender role stuff disproportionately affects men, because with women and feminism, it's like we see what the men are doing, we're like, we want that. We want to be able to do that. There's already something there to like achieve. It already exists as a structure. But when it comes to men, their role is being diminished. For men, it used to be you are the provider. You're the one who takes care of the family. You're the one who makes the money. You're the one who does all these things. Now that women can do all those things and there's less need for a breadwinner, and like everyone's like a dual income house nowadays, a lot of that meaning is eroded. And I think that's why men particularly seem to be going through so much of an existential kind of crisis and not knowing what their role is in society anymore, especially because, not to be like that person, but like literally men are demonized in the media just for existing like all the time. Like, the feminist movement has gotten so aggressive, and I'm obviously going to talk about this in future videos. I know I've been saying that for a while, but the point I'm trying to make is that these shifting gender roles, it leaves us in a more vulnerable spot because it's so new, and because this equality thing is so new, that it's really hard for people to kind of have a structure to look towards and to exist in that's already set for them. They kind of have to make their own meaning in a way that they haven't before. And then also when it comes to generations, before the Industrial Revolution, every generation was basically the same. Life is very similar. Like, it followed the same trajectory. The social structures were the same. The markets and agriculture and economy were the same. Things were slow paced. It wasn't as, fast moving as it is now. And then since the Industrial Revolution, things have just gone crazy fast. Generations are changing. Like the fact that we have a baby boomer, a Gen X, a millennial, a Gen Z, and they're only 15 years apart is so significant. Like, it's so fast moving that generations literally have these defining qualities to them. And I feel like it's only going faster with technological innovation and how fast technology is going. I feel like elder Gen Zs like myself can't even relate to younger Gen Zs. Like, younger Gen Zs to me, if you're 16, I feel like we're in different generations, like different worlds. But it's because everything is moving so fast. There's also so much information out there, literally way too much information than you could ever consume in a lifetime. It's really overwhelming. I just think the confluence of all these things is just adding a lot to mental health crises, and just questions about existence and meaning, and not having a set meaning, and kind of the disadvantages that can come with that. I don't know, that last part was a little bit rambly, sorry about that. Sometimes I get like that, but that's what I wanted to say on this video. Let me know if you liked any aspect of it, give it a like or a thumbs up. I'm sorry that I asked that at the end of every video, but it really helps my videos with the algorithm. It will help this video go see more people if you like and comment. I'm sure, as with any video, as with anything, I'm sure there are things that you disagree with and things that you agree with. Let me know what they are down below, anything that's on your mind. Let me know if there's anything that I missed. I mean, this is a big topic. I'm sure there's plenty. And if you're subscribed to my channel, number one, thank you. And number two, that means that I will see you in my next upload. So until then, bye.